It's been a week. It's been a interesting week. A week ago, many of us, were realizing the extent of the July 4th flooding that happened nearby. And I don't think that we really had time to fully understand all that took place, all that was happening. It's not every week that the national newspapers carry front page headlines of your area here in San Antonio in the Hill Country day after day. A week ago, many of us were dropping our children off for camp within hours of learning the extent of the devastation and the loss of life. And so we've spent a week, some of us, reading about stories of people being swept away miles down the river while our own children were at camp. And then there's the people who were at camp. And in my youth ministry days, almost every day at camp, someone would say something like, "Isn't this just feels like the way we're supposed to live? Doesn't this just feel right?" And so we come today with mixed emotions. Some of us are dealing with the national news while also dealing with recent grief, burying a loved one, saying goodbye to somebody very important to you. There's even the post-camp grief. It's a real thing. It's a real thing to go from feeling like I'm living the way I'm supposed to be living. I'm living with the people I want to be living with, and then I'm not. That's hard. And you come home and you think, I'm going to be a different person. I want to live better. And you're so tired that the first thing that your mom or your dad says to you just gets on your last nerve. Maybe it's happened, maybe it hasn't. I don't know. It's normal. One of my disciplines every week is I'm thinking about what God is calling us to say. What God is calling us to say is, how are people showing up on Sunday morning? And this is one of those weeks, I don't know. A lot of different ways. A lot of beautiful ways, a lot of tragic ways. And so in this discipline, one of the great friendships and working relationships of my life, John Hodges, so we talked about this, helped me think of the words that I think God is asking us to ask this morning. How do we speak of God today? How will the people of God speak of God after the week we've had? There's not more tragedies lately than there has been in the history of the world. The world's always been full of tragic events. We are more aware of all the tragedies that happen. We read about them constantly. One of the great interesting things that I was able to read about during COVID was that 100 years ago, during the 1918 Great Flu epidemic, the many American communities never knew it happened. The news never got there. The flu never got there, and the news never got there. They didn't know it happened. We are not so fortunate. We know when every travesty happens. But one thing that feels different, one thing that grieves my heart, one thing that I feel like we have lost in the span of so much loss, is it doesn't seem like the church is speaking to the people of God when these travesties happen. It's all right. One of the amazing moments in the history of this country was the way that the civil rights movement was a theological movement. That the reason why the Civil Rights Act eventually was passed was the pressure put on politicians by people who understood God to be doing something new. And people like the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King spoke of God in those tragedies, in those travesties. And maybe those voices aren't speaking or aren't being amplified, but I don't hear the church speaking. I don't hear the church knowing what to say when we read about hundreds of people dead, hundreds of people missing. And part of that's understandable. How on earth do you speak of that? How do you know what to say? How do you know how to speak of God when so much destruction happens so quickly? Well, I think the church needs to work on that. I think we need to work on that, and we need to be asking ourselves, we need to get in the habit of asking ourselves, what is God saying to us in this moment? And what will the people of God say of God in these moments? We need to develop those muscles. The world is counting on us. Where else will they learn of hope if we do not develop the muscles of hope, the wisdom of hope? It has to be us. Fortunately for us, this is not the first time that the people of God have faced such tragedy, such destruction. We just read about one of the most destructive, awful things that has ever happened to the people of God. We read about it in the poetic sense, the wisdom literature sense when we read Lamentations. It's reflected in what Ryan spoke about. Peter asking Jesus, where else are we going to go? But I want to take a moment here and show us the history of this. I think it's important to learn the history of what the people are singing of, are reciting in Lamentations. This is from 2 Kings 25. In the 5th month of the 7th day of the month, in the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, we're going to call him Neb from now on, captain of the guard, an official king of Babylon, entered Jerusalem, city of God, where the presence of God dwells among the people. The city that God has told King David will never end. The city, the epitome of God's faithfulness to Israel. A city where God's presence will never leave. These are promises that the people got. Well, he enters Jerusalem. He burns down the house of Yahweh and the king's house and all the houses of Jerusalem, including every great man's house. He set on fire and burned. The whole army of the Chaldeans tore down the walls of Jerusalem all around. The rest of the people who were left in the city and those who had deserted to king of Babylon and the rest of the populace, Neb, captain of the guard, took to Babylon as prisoners. Captain of the guard left only some of the poorest in the country to tend the vines and to farm the land. This is a work by Francisco Hayes, The Destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem. It's devastating. It's the worst possible thing that could happen to Israel. You could not ask ChatGPT to come up with a worse thing. It is not only the destruction of life. It is not only the pillaging, the defiling of God's house where God's presence lives. It is not only the emotional, but also the spiritual, the physical destruction of all of one's life. And those who had any sort of influence were taken to Babylon to be enslaved again, while the poorest among them were left to keep working the fields so that Israel's land, Israel's promise, the land flowing with milk and honey, could now become the riches of King Nebuchadnezzar. Insult to injury. It's devastation. It's the worst possible thing. And from this destruction comes the book of Lamentations. From this destruction comes these 5 poems. These 5 poems that are all, and this matters, they're all acrostic poems. I want us to show you here how that's my left. Yep, your left too when I turn around. That there is at the beginning of each line, off to the side there, it may have even got cut off, but off to the side there, the Hebrew letter Aleph. Every line, the first 3 lines start with Aleph, because the 3rd chapter, the middle, the most important chapter, the one that we are focusing on today, is not like chapters 1 and 2 and 4, which are just single line acrostics, where every line begins with the next alphabetical letter. But chapter 3 triples it. Aleph, first line. Aleph, the second line. Because what Lamentations seems to be is an immediate reflection on the destruction that they have just experienced. Perhaps even on the way in chains to Babylon. As they're contemplating what it means to be the people who, because God loved them, were freed from slavery, have now been enslaved again. What could that mean? Well, destruction. And why is it this acrostic? Why is it a poem? Why would you make it something so easy to remember? I have a theory. I think it's because it's worship. I think it's because it is to be something recited either liturgically as a poem or even turned into a song on the way to Babylon, or in Babylon itself, where King Nebuchadnezzar is not going to furnish us with our worship books. We were going to have to commit this to memory. We're going to have to remember the lament. Why is it so important for Israel to worship in this way? Why is it so important for them to speak of God to the world in this way? Well, their career as the prophetic people, as the priestly people, it's not ended just because they're going to Babylon, just because they're enslaved again. And so when they speak of God, they speak of God this way. And the other point of the acrostic, not only is it easy to remember, but going through the entire alphabet, it signifies completion. A, Jerusalem is destroyed. B, Jerusalem is destroyed. C, did we mention God did not protect Jerusalem? So how do they speak of God? You might have noticed something that people have found problematic for a while. They do not say God allowed Babylon to come take care of us. They do not say that, God kind of looked the other way. Every single line is God's doing. A, God did not protect Jerusalem. B, God destroyed us. Did Babylon destroy us? No. It was God. He wasted my flesh and my skin. He shattered my bones. He built up against me, encompassed me with misery and suffering. He made me dwell in darkness like those long dead. He walled me in. I could not go out, piled heavy bronze fetters upon me. He, though I cried out and shouted, he blocked my prayer. He walled in my way with hewn stone. He twisted my paths. It's hard. It's hard to hear as people who are currently living in a state of asking, how do we speak of God? To hear the first peoples of God speak about God as though this is God's doing. I'll never forget being in graduate school when Hurricane Katrina hit. And we came to our Old Testament theology professor saying, did God do this? And thank God for him, Dr. John Willis took that question very seriously and very rationally. And he said, we're going to speak of God. We're going to take this opportunity to speak of God the way we've been learning that Israel speaks of God, because faithfulness is learning to speak of God the way God's first people spoke of God. In the entire Old Testament, there is not one single passive verb attributed to God. That might seem really nerdy and overly academic, but God does not allow anything to happen. When I hear allow attributed to God, I have like this stick thing that happens, because I remember speaking of God that way, turning in papers to Dr. John Willis, speaking of that way, and then coming back with more red on them than black and white, because no, that's passive voice. No, we don't speak of God that way. So I've been trained, I think, well, to have a prisoner-like response to the passive voice, the passive verbs for God. God does not allow anything in Lamentations to happen. God did it. So we come to Dr. Willis and said, did God flood New Orleans? Did God flood the Hill Country? Dr. Willis said to us at that time, I think it's important for us to know now that there's three options. Either God did it, or sinful humans did it, or the third option, which is sometimes most difficult, just happens. Sometimes there's no reason. Creation itself is a character in Scripture. When Jesus breathes his last, it is not God who makes the earthquake. It is not God who makes the eclipse happen where the sun goes dark. Creation does that on its own. Creation is a living, breathing thing. God is the one that continues to feed creation and love creation and foster creation. God is the great gardener. And so God can tell creation what to do and say. And so the options are God did it, sinful humanity did it, or it just happened. And it's difficult. It's difficult in this moment when the church wants to be something, when the church wants to say something to our world of God. It's hard to know how to speak of God. One option has to be that God did it. That God is the great actor. Because if God is just the kind of God who makes a clock and makes it beautifully and makes it run, but then starts it and steps away, then we aren't the people that can turn and speak to God, because God's not interested. God's not here. There's this deistic idea of God, that God's just around but not really interested in human suffering. And so the lines that we sang before the sermon, you give and you take away, those can't be true. God neither gives nor takes away. God is just impassive. That is not how Israel speaks of God. We might have a hard time with Israel turning to God and saying, this is all your fault. But Israel has a three-dimensional relationship with God. A one-dimensional relationship would be that God is God and we're here, but we have no idea who God is. God only knows about us. A two-dimensional relationship might be something like the Greco and Roman gods, that gods are gods and we're here and they can come mess with us when they want, but really we have no mutuality with them. We have no relationship with them. There's no with those gods. Israel doesn't speak of God that way. Israel speaks of God in three dimensions. God is God, we are human, but God listens to us. God is even honored when the lament worship rises to God's ears. We will never have clear answers when the world asks us, where is your God? We won't have clear answers to that. We don't know. You could try to tell them that there's three possibilities, but that's probably not what they need to hear right then. We will not know what God is always doing, but we know about God. Because God has chosen to have a three-dimensional relationship with us. God reveals himself to us. God listens to us. God responds to our worship and our prayers. One of the great questions of the text is, what changed? What changed? You go from shaking your fist at God, he has done this, and he has done that, and he has done this, and he has done that. This is all God's fault. To the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. God's mercies are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. What changed? And I think I've finally realized this question that's haunted people who studied Lamentations for years and years and years. I think I have an answer. I think nothing changed. I think absolutely nothing changed. I imagine the author of this poem walking to Babylon in shackles, writing in some sort of crude pen and paper, A, God left us. B, God did not save Jerusalem. C, this was done by God's hand. And somewhere along the way, he has that same understanding, that same moment that Peter had with Jesus. Where else am I going to go? Where else would I turn? God is simultaneously responsible and a God who will hear our lament and our blame, who will even be honored by the kind of shaking of our fist that sometimes lacks understanding because we don't see the whole picture, but God is still listening when we say, where were you? And God is the only author of life. One of the most difficult moments in my life was at another congregation when a friend and a mentor gathered the staff together and revealed to us that they had done something terrible. And so much of my worldview and my understanding of ministry and of that person and of myself and this church and what churches are even doing, it broke in that moment. It just broke. And I remember walking around the church, not really willing to go home and give all of this disorientation over to my family right away. And finally realizing this is what they're talking about in Scripture when they talk about putting on ashcloth. When they talk about putting on burlap as clothing and pouring ashes on your head. There are some things that are just worthy of our lament. I turned out to the cars passing loudly, quickly on I-65, and I just yelled. Just this guttural, I didn't have words, just, so angry at you. And I thank God for the Psalms and for Lamentations. I believe that God let me just stay there and be angry. It was the right thing to do. It was the faithful thing to do. Because God is alone powerful. God alone can give. God alone can take away. So God is both big enough to hear our lament, but also big enough to be there in the morning. Because something amazing happened to me. I went home, I fell asleep, and in the morning the sun rose again. And in the morning I had enough food to eat. In the morning, I still had my friends and my families who loved me despite myself. And all of that came from God, too. We won't always know who the author of the tragedies in our life are. We will not see that fully. But there is only one place to find hope. And those two things sometimes feel like they can't go together, but church, they do. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Do you know what that means? The portion, that's the part of the land flowing with milk and honey that you got. Your portion. It reminds us maybe of food, maybe of something really, really good we once ate. It's that too, because to a people who farm the land, who live off the land, your portion is also one day your meal, your supper. And as they march to Babylon and their portion is being farmed by someone else so that King Nebuchadnezzar can eat, they have no portion left. They're going to be starving for the next years. My portion is the Lord. I will wake up in the morning. I will have what it takes to live. I will breathe God's air. I will keep living because even in tragedy, the steadfast love of God is not exhausted by King Nebuchadnezzar. He cannot put out God's love for you. He cannot exhaust God's love for the lives lost in the hill country. A flood, or if you want to blame someone else, there's some human agent that caused this or didn't do their job or whatever. None of that matters. Because the love of God for the lost lives, the love of God for the people who are mourning, the love of God for you cannot be drowned by any flood. It is new every morning. And every morning when you wake up and you take the breath of God into your lungs, you don't even maybe even know it, but you are worshiping the one who has put that breath there. How does the church speak of God in moments like this? Sometimes it's really hard. Sometimes we don't know. There aren't always easy, clear-cut answers. We cannot excuse God, and that's okay. It's okay to say we don't know, but when the church doesn't know how to speak of God, we can speak with God. It is the invitation to speak with God. Just like the poem does. Did you notice that? He has done this, and he has done that. He has left us. It's his fault. And then I listen to my soul. And what does my soul say? My soul says wisdom that is lost to my brain. It says, God, your steadfast love is new for me even in this morning. Even on the morning of July 5th, God's mercies are new for us. God's steadfast love cannot be extinguished. And so not knowing how to speak of God is the first and best invitation for the people of God to turn and speak with God. How else will we know? How else will we testify? How else will we preach to a world who is struck by one disaster after another? We have to learn how to be with God. So that's how we are going to end this sermon. That's how we're going to end this time asking ourselves, how do we speak of God? We are going to take some time of communal silence. We are going to speak with God. I invite you to do that any way that is best for you. I ask you to try to embrace the silence of the moment. It's hard for a large group of people who are not used to silence to be silent together, but we can do it. If that means that you would like to get on your knees, get on your knees. If you would like to stand and raise hands, you can do that. I invite you to do what makes most sense for your body to be with God. I invite you to speak in your head. I invite you to listen. And if you need a question to focus your thoughts, here's one you might do. God, where are your mercies for me this morning? God, help me see your mercies for me this morning. I'm going to say a prayer for us, and then we'll enter this time of silence. God, it is such a risk to speak of you. It is dangerous to say that we don't know when people ask us, did God have a part in this? But we don't have to remain silent because we know you. We know who you are. You make yourself available to us. You even let us speak to you in ways that there is no other God who allows the people to speak to them that way. In this way, you are a strange God because you think so highly of us. You think so highly of us that when we turn our hearts to speak to you, you listen. And you have compassion on us. When we shake our fists at you and ask, why, God? We may not always have an answer, but you are always there. So for this morning, for your mercies that are new to us, for your love that cannot be exhausted, for your love that cannot be drowned, we ask that we would become aware of that as we sit with you in your presence in this time together.